Hello and welcome to another Photoshop editing tutorial. In this video we are going to add some drama to this boring daytime landscape image. The editing process is basically split up in 3 parts, with the basic raw adjustments first, then we are going to clean up the shot, and finally we're going to enhance it some more by doing a little bit of dodging and burning. So let's jump into it. For the raw adjustments I'm in the camera raw editor. Alternatively, you could also of course use Lightroom, for example. To start things, I want to change the profile from Adobe Color to Adobe Standard, just to have a more flat image to begin with. The white balance looks quite good since we have some natural colors going on. However, I have the feeling there's a slight green color cast. I can try to fix that by bringing up the tint just a little bit and reducing the green colors in the image. The base shot is very bright, we almost have no details in the sky, and overall it's a very flat image. A lot of contrast will be added using some masking. However, before I start that, I'm going through the basic exposure adjustments. That means first off I'd like to bring down the exposure, making this whole shot a lot darker. However, at the same time I'm going to bring up the shadows. I'm also bringing up the blacks. And I'm going to even increase the highlights all the way up. This helps adding a little bit of contrast, and the good thing here is it's not overexposing the image when we're looking at the histogram. Then I'd like to add some texture, giving this scene a little bit more sharpness and of course some more vibrance for stronger color tones. Alright, that's it for the basic stuff. Compared to before, you can see it's a bit darker, but we also have some more contrast, which is nice. However, to add some really cool effects here, I'm going to use the masking stuff. So let's jump into that. I want to add contrast to the sky. We do have a few very bright white clouds in here against the dark blue sky in the back. Also, I want to add this feeling of a storm coming in from the left side, where we already have some darker clouds, and we can do that by simply using a color range mask. With the color range mask active, I'm trying to select all the blue color tones in the sky. So you can see I'm missing a few parts on the left side. That's not a big deal. I'm simply holding down the shift key and clicking there again. And this way I'm working my way through the image, trying to target all those blue color tones in the sky. This is looking like a good selection, so let's just try and bring down the exposure. And you can see how we can add some nice contrast without affecting the brightest clouds. We can further bring up the clarity here and maybe even add some dehaze. Just like that. I do want to add another mask for the sky. This time I'm using a linear gradient, and I'm not trying to cover the whole sky but a good portion of it. Since we have applied a lot stronger shadows with the previous mask, I can now use this linear gradient and just target the shadows by bringing them down and add some further contrast to the sky. So let's drop the shadows quite a bit again. Okay. At the same time I want to bring up the clarity to make the clouds pop. That is looking really good. So I think I'm done with the sky for now. Next up, let's target the foreground. There are many ways to do that. For example, I could use a color range mask again and simply click in the foreground and try to catch all those orange tones. Again, I'm holding down the shift key and click on the area which I don't have selected. Just try to get them all selected. With that mask, I'm going to slightly increase the exposure, making the area brighter. Also, I want to bring up the temperature, so we do have more of a golden color tone going on in the foreground, but at the same time I want to bring down the saturation to not overdo that. Just like this. Another way to select the foreground is by using the sky mask, but of course we don't want to select the sky, we want to select the foreground. So with the sky mask I'm simply hitting the invert button for a perfect landscape selection. So what we can do here is to further increase the whites for some more brightness. And maybe let's add some texture to give this field some more sharpness. Actually, I do think I would want to add some more saturation here. I don't want the field to look gray. So let's just bring back some saturation. Alright, I think we're almost done with the masking stuff. Let's add one more linear gradient just for the very near foreground here. And in here I'm going to slightly drop the exposure. I'm also dropping the shadows and even the whites. And this will just make the very near foreground a bit darker, leading the eye to the straw bales in the center. Those were some pretty powerful masking adjustments. Let's compare to before. You can see it's a completely different image basically, and it looks like there's a big storm approaching from the left. So that's really my intention for this shot. Now, before we can start cleaning up this image, I do want to do a little bit of color grading, and therefore I'm starting in the color mixer tab with the hue. Here I do want to bring down the yellow hue and just add some more orange tones to the field. Then I'm switching over to the saturation, and here let's bring up the yellow saturation. Okay, I'm really careful here. I don't want to overdo that, but that looks good at the moment. Finally, we can head into the luminance tab and further brighten up the foreground by simply pushing the yellow luminance. Just be careful to not overdo it, because it becomes very visible if you do overdo it. That's looking good, however. Let's continue doing some split toning in the color grading tab. Let's begin with the highlights. Here I'm going to apply a very warm color tone, of course. I'm using a rather low saturation, however, I don't want to get overwhelmed by warm color tones in this shot. For the midtones, I'm going to use a cold color tone, and the midtones mostly will affect the sky in this image. So that works well with the dark sky. Again, I'm using a low saturation value like that, but this looks super cool already. The final part of the color grading is happening in the calibration tab. Here I'm just bringing down the blue primary hue. This will make the foreground a little more orange. And at the same time I want to bring up the saturation. So that's looking pretty good. Finally, we can sharpen this image real quick in the details tab, bring down the radius, increase the detail, add some masking, and then bring up the sharpening. Just like that. Perfect. So that's our image after the raw adjustments. You can see it looks much better right now with the dark sky. The next step is to clean up the shot, and of course we're going to do that in Photoshop. So there are just a few things that really annoy me, and that is those straw bales behind the horizon right there and here. Then there's a little bit of a hill coming up on the right side, and also this dark stripe going through the foreground is a little distracting. So let me see how we can start this. I think I'm just starting with the hill on the right side. Therefore, I'm going to use the clone stamp tool first. Let's give it a try. I'm just copying an area right next to this hill and just try to brush away the things which are standing up behind the horizon. It doesn't have to be very precise since it's a very small area, and even if you print the image, you wouldn't notice that. So that's looking so much better already. We can do basically the same thing with those straw bales in the background, just using the clone stamp tool. And you can see I'm using a very hard brush. That's because I want to have a rough edge. So let's copy this part right there and just place it over the straw bale. Perfect. And let's do it once more. Alright, and we can also use the clone stamp tool for that stripe in the foreground. Actually, I just want to duplicate that background layer in case I mess something up. So I just have a backup here, and let's try clone stamping this thing out. I think that works pretty good because the foreground is super chaotic, so we don't really recognize if there's anything sketchy going on. Alright, perfect. That looks really good. So now on to the final part of the post-processing, which is the dodging and burning stuff. First off, I'd like to dodge the foreground a little more, making the field just a little brighter. So let's create a new layer, and for the dodging and burning stuff I'm using the TK panel plugin. Since a lot of people have been asking, this is a paid plugin, but there is also a free version available with all the needed tools to create luminosity masks for the dodging and burning. To target the foreground, I'm using one of the lights masks. I think the lights 3 works pretty good since it's not selecting all of the field in the foreground. So let's just use that on this new layer I just created, of course as the layer mask. And then let's switch the blending mode to overlay. Since we want to dodge things, I'm going to set the foreground color to white and grab the brush tool and make sure to bring down the brush opacity a notch. And now let's just paint in some more brightness. And I'm just targeting the very top part of the field, not the foreground. But that's already looking so much better. Next up, we can work on the sky. First, of course, a new layer. Again, use the overlay blending mode. And for the sky, obviously, we want to make it darker. And I'm talking specifically about the dark part above the horizon. Let's see if we can find a darks mask, which works good in this case. Not so sure. I do want to try a color mask, going for the blue color tones. Not better. Maybe design color tones, and they seem to work pretty good. So let's use that as a layer mask. Then, since we want to burn things, we're going to change the foreground color from white to black. Again, I think I want to lower the brush opacity. So that should be a good spot right there. And now I'm just starting to brush over the sky in the background without changing the foreground at all. So that's working really good. We could even increase the opacity of the brush and just add some more darkness to the sky in the back. Perfect. Let's see if we can target those cyan tones some more. For that reason I'm using a hue saturation adjustment layer, and instead of the master settings I'm going to choose the cyan tones, of course. And here let's just bring down the lightness, making them a little darker again. And at the same time I could push the saturation a bit. Okay, compared to before I think it looks better. Next up, we could play around with the contrast a little more, and here let's just use a levels adjustment layer. I could try bringing up the black point, introducing some more black tones. I think that might be a bit too much, so let's tone it down. But I think I want to target the middle part and just play around with that, which has a really nice effect on this image, since a lot of the sky is affected by the middle tones. So that's very subtle, but it looks good. And I think at this point we're pretty much done with the editing. So I hope this tutorial was helpful and interesting. If you have any questions left, as always, feel free to ask in the comments, and thank you very much for watching this video.